Now that we've discussed the parts of the brain, we're going to delve into the function of the brain and how memory works. One of the things about our brain is that our two halves of our cerebrum have different functions. They develop specialization as we age, and the left hemisphere tends to be more categorical. It's specialized for language and sequential and analytical reasoning, things that happen in math and science, and analyzes data in a linear way. The right hemisphere is the more representational hemisphere. It perceives information holistically and is really good at spatial relationships and patterns and comparing special senses, as well as imagination, music, and artistic skill. The side of your brain that is dominant is highly correlated with handedness. So 91% of right-handed people are left side dominant. It is a contralateral relationship. And lateralization develops with age. So the hemispheres become more specialized as you grow and develop in age. Females have more communication between the hemispheres because the corpus callosum is thicker posteriorly in females, and therefore have more communication and sometimes can make better connections between these two halves of the brain. This is just a chart that highlights some of the differences in the halves of the brain. Whereas the left hemisphere has good verbal memory and speech skills, the right hemisphere has a much better memory for shapes, both memory for shapes and feeling shapes, and non-vocal sounds, whereas vocal sounds are better heard in the right ear. Musical ability is better in the right hemisphere, as is spatial relationship recognition, and rational symbolic thought is better in the left hemisphere. Language includes reading, writing, speaking, and understanding words. There are two main areas of our brain that are important in language. The Wernicke area permits the recognition of spoken and written language and creates a plan of speech. This area is in the parietal and temporal lobe, kind of at the junction between the parietal, the temporal, and the occipital lobe. The Broca area, on the other hand, generates the motor signals for the larynx, tongue, cheek, and lips, and actually allows you to make that plan of the motor signals that have to happen for you to say things. It then transmits this to the primary motor cortex to execute this action. So if we take a look at our brain, our Broca area is here in the frontal lobe of the brain near the precentral gyrus, so it can send signals right over to the speech center of the primary motor cortex, whereas the Wernicke area is kind of at the junction between the parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. This allows it to take in auditory, visual information, so if you're reading language, and any other sensory information that's coming in, and process that into language. We can look at the electrical signals in the brain by using an electroencephalogram. This device records voltage changes from postsynaptic potentials in the cerebral cortex. So as many cells depolarize at the same time, this voltage change can be recorded by this device. There are 4 types of brainwaves that are distinguished by amplitude, which is height, and frequency, which is how often there's a peak. Alpha waves have a moderate amplitude and moderate frequency, and they occur when you are awake and resting with your eyes closed. Beta waves occur when your eyes are open and you're performing mental tasks. These have a moderate amplitude but are more frequent than alpha waves. Theta waves occur during sleep or emotional stress. They are less frequent and slightly higher in amplitude. Delta waves occur during deep sleep, and these tend to have a higher amplitude and a much lower frequency. So they're kind of more wave-like than spiky. Memory is information management. It requires learning, remembering, and forgetting. Amnesia is the lack of ability to remember. There are two main types of amnesia: anterograde amnesia, where no new memories can be formed, and retrograde amnesia, where you cannot remember old memories. The parts of the brain involved with memory are the hippocampus, which organizes sensory and cognitive information into that new memory. The cerebellum helps to learn motor skills, like riding a bike or hitting a baseball. The amygdala deals with emotional memory, so connecting that emotion and memory together. The physical basis of memory is a new pathway. So we form new pathways, or we modify existing synapses to make transmission easier. This is called synaptic plasticity. We are actually able to grow new dendrites or axon branches in order to create new synapses. Synaptic potentiation is important because transmission mechanisms correlate with different forms of memory, and by basically warming up that synapse, it helps to make some forms of memory work better. Immediate memory is the ability to hold something in your thoughts for just a few seconds. It's essential for reading ability and gives you a feel for the flow of events and a sense of the present. This happens because our memory of what just happened echoes in our minds for a few seconds due to reverberating circuits. The signal not only goes through the input neuron to the output neuron, but it also reverberates or echoes and re-stimulates that output neuron. And as that re-stimulation occurs, we get more signals coming through that output neuron, and we remember something for just a short period. Short-term memory also uses reverberating circuits and lasts from a few seconds to several hours. It's quickly forgotten if you're distracted. So if you're looking for your keys or trying to dial a phone number on the phone, or if you're at your friend's house and you punch in the gate code, you probably aren't going to remember that gate code for very long, but you might remember it, long enough to tell the next friend that's behind you. So these reverberating circuits basically make things echo in your mind. Facilitation causes these memories to last longer, and this is because tetanic stimulation, rapid repetitive signals, basically the echo, causes calcium accumulation and makes the cells more likely to fire. So basically they're easier to trigger. There's a term called post-tetanic potentiation, and that's a fancy way of saying jogging a memory. Because the calcium level in the synaptic knobs stays elevated, we only need a small amount of stimulation to recover the memory because of this calcium that's around. So it's easier to have neurotransmitter release after a circuit or pathway has been stimulated repetitively in this reverberating echoing circuit. Long-term memory involves two types of long-term memory. There's declarative memory, which is retention of facts as text, and procedural memory, which is retention of motor skills. Both of these involve physical remodeling of synapses, which requires new branching of axons or new dendrites to be formed, or a combination of both. The reason for these physical changes are molecular changes during our short-term memory process. the tetanic stimulation that occurs during short-term memory causes ionic changes in the neuron, and those ionic changes lead to the physical remodeling of the synapse. So things that can happen because of tetanic stimulation include a neuron producing more neurotransmitter receptors, more protein synthesis for synapse remodeling, and release of nitric oxide that stimulates presynaptic neurons to release more neurotransmitter. So those will all help with this new building of synapses. The scheme for long-term memory is that outside stimuli signals receptors, and that sensory information comes in through both our general and specialized sensory receptors. Our afferent inputs take the information to our cerebral cortex, and our cerebral cortex can transfer that to short-term memory and eventually long-term memory. Transferring things from short-term memory to long-term memory is influenced by how exciting the material is, how often the material is rehearsed, and whether the material is associated with stored data or old memories. If you can make things exciting, rehearse it more frequently, and associate new material with stuff you already know, it's easier to store new information as long-term memory. Some data is forgotten and permanently lost, and some is stored but unretrievable. When we need to remember something, we retrieve it from long-term memory and bring it up into our short-term memory in order to use it. Next, we're going to discuss some diseases and disorders of the brain.